I know it's been a little bit since I made a video. Well, I don't stop fishing all summer long, but the amount of time that I spend on the water is honestly a little bit less. Yes, bass's metabolism is active. Yes, bass tend to do a little more, but to be honest with you, the heat anymore to me makes a big difference in the choice that I make this time of year. I just been honest with you. I usually go early in the morning, and then I usually go about 1 o'clock. I'm usually done for the day, and there's a good reason for that. Usually I go early in the morning in the summertime to get that morning topwater or a morning active bite. And then if it's going to be just a sunny bluebird day, then usually about 12 o'clock I'm usually headed back to the house. If it's going to be a rainy day, then I'll stay out a little bit longer because I feel like the bite is a little bit better. Yes, if the wind picks up, then I'll stick around and do a little bit other things. That's just the way I've done for the last several years as I've gotten older. A little bit harder to stand out there in that sun all day and just kind of bury it and take it. So this video, what I want to do is I want to just talk to you a little bit about different kind of baits, my kind of theories on different types of bait. So first off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a couple pictures of a couple different lures that we've used just this year, and then we're going to talk about them a little bit. So take a look at these pictures first, and then we're going to talk about a few of them. All right, so it came to mind to name this video, things about bass fishing that I wish somebody would have told me years ago. Truth is, when we all first get into bass fishing, we tend to all have that favorite bait that we just think is the best fish catching bait there is. And that's pretty much the bait we throw, and all of us have the choice to do that. What I'm suggesting to you, and what I wish somebody had told me years ago, that I needed to not look at a bait because I thought that specific bait was the best bait that ever was. But what I needed to do was I needed to treat all the baits as different tools to get a job done. So the reason for that is you saw their pictures of a lot of different bass. The only reason I chose the larger bass is because that's usually what draws everybody's attention. We have it in our mind that if a bait catches a bigger size bass, then that automatically means that bait's better. Well, that's not always true, because of course we tend to think that because we all like to be able to say, I caught the biggest bass. The truth is that just because you caught the biggest bass doesn't mean that was probably the best lure to use that day. That just means that that day you basically run across a fish with the bait you were using. Now, if you start catching 2 or 3 of that same class, then for the day, you may have actually done very well. You may have stumbled onto a pattern that actually works really good. But for me to physically say, as you saw in those pictures, that a rounded type crankbait is better than a flat-sided crankbait, that's not said necessarily true. Now, if you give me different seasons, then this crankbait is probably going to be better at drawing strikes at certain seasons or from a different bass on a different day than this one. That may be very well true. Same thing applies to every bait we use. You know, here's basically the two different styles of spinner baits. I make these myself, and these are the two spinner baits that you'll see me using a lot throughout the videos and throughout different times of the year. You know, a willow leaf blade spinner bait, the exact same frame, it's the exact same frame, the exact same weight, exact same colored skirt. This one doesn't have the orange neck on it, this one does, but it's just because I haven't put it on there yet. I just didn't do it to this one. But that's the only thing really that separates from the R bend down of these two baits. Now, you can say that, well, this one has this little swim bait trailer on the bottom of it versus this one doesn't. That's a difference, but other than that, it's the exact same thing. Same blade wire, same everything. Because of the different blade configurations, two different actions. Naturally, or most of the time, this is more dirtier water, or maybe a certain time of year to slow the bait down. This one is the clearer water. But this is a very good example of the different types of baits that work at different seasons. A lot of times people, because of our stubbornness, we tend to gravitate to where we are kind of hard-headed and stubborn, and we want to keep throwing that same bait over and over that maybe hasn't gotten a bite that day. A lot of the days that you'll see me throughout the videos that I've been blessed to make, going out fishing, I've started out with some of these baits that maybe worked the time before, and then all of a sudden I haven't gotten a bite, so I've had to switch and go back through. That's part of the process that a lot of you don't see. I talk about it, but a lot of you don't see it. But then when you see the video, they're like, oh wow, you can catch them on that too. Oh wow, I didn't realize that you can catch them on this bait. Each tool will reach a bass and draw a bass out striking at different times of the year. You know, I wouldn't necessarily get in the muddiest water that I can get, you know, with 6 inches visibility and throw this little tight line and expect to get a bite. You know, I might get a few bites with it, but the truth is that this would be more of a clear water, and we've already seen that, especially in clear water in the middle of winter, this little technique right here is deadly. If you have spotted bass or smallmouth, this right here is deadly to very good sized smallmouth. But in that same clear winter time, in that clear water, you may not be able to get them to come up shallow and hit a crankbait bouncing on the rocks. You might, but which one of the two would be the most efficient? A lot of times this one here does. This bait here is a little better in off-colored water. Doesn't have to be muddy, but it's better in off-colored water, and they're shallower. That bait tends to do a little bit deeper. This bait here, you can, similar thing. You can still throw this. I caught several largemouth with this flat-sided crankbait. This is a Bagley, balsa flat. You can get bites with this in a little different type of water. In the winter time, it doesn't necessarily have to be crystal clear water, but it can be just a little bit stained, and this right here would catch them pretty good. We did that also earlier in the year. So the truth is that in order to be an all-round, because I get people asking me this all the time, number one, I am blessed by the Lord. Every fish I've ever caught, you heard me say, thank you, Jesus, because that's just the way I feel about it. I'm blessed to even be able to have the breath to go out and do these things, just to go out in His creation. But a little bit too that I've learned over the last few years that I've been fishing is that I had to learn how to be versatile. If I wanted to be successful, I needed to learn to be versatile. I taught myself and learned and studied how to do the drop shot, which it has its own season. You know, in the wintertime, you see me throw a lot of this tight line here recently. Same thing with that little technique. I saw it, I watched a few videos on it, it interested me. I'm like, I need to learn how to use that. It took time. A lot of people made fun of me because they were like, oh man, all you do is throw that little spinning rod and that little light line, and you catching all them little bitty 6-inchers, and boy, you know, if you get a bigger rod, you can do a lot better. Well, a lot of those same people didn't have comments when I was catching 3 to 4 pound smallmouth on Lake Cumberland. And I'm not saying that to brag, I'm just saying that little technique, that's what it started producing. Because at a certain time of year, that little technique was the key to use. Same thing with the spinnerbait. You know, I wouldn't necessarily throw that spinnerbait in crystal clear water, but if it's a rainy day, then we can probably pull it out and try to use it. So what I'm trying to get to you here is, this is the stuff that I wish somebody would have told me. As a bass fisherman, the best thing you can do is to pick you a few key baits and learn how to use them. Learn when to use them, experiment and try them. You're not going to become overnight this everything works. You're going to go on one fishing trip and it's going to work out okay because you picked the right bait that day and that worked great. Next time you go, the conditions are going to be different. You're going to have to learn day by day how to change and adapt to those different conditions. Nowadays, a lot of times people are spending a lot of money, and I'm not saying that they're having adapting. I'm not trying to get into that whole argument, but a lot of people are trying to go out and just use one little fishing system and just catch all the fish that way, and that's just the way I'm always going to do it. They don't catch them every time they go either. You know, you still have to trigger within that bass to bite. And a lot of times, I'll just be honest with you, a lot of times we do it by accident. A lot of times that's how fishing is. We go out, we try our best, and we catch 2 or 3 little fish and we go home. Sometimes we go and we don't catch anything. You know, there's days to where I have been stubborn and I've wanted all day long to catch them on that spinnerbait, and I've thrown that spinnerbait for 5 hours and hadn't had a bite, or 3 hours and ain't had a bite. Then what have I done? I've put it down and said, you know what, I guess I'm just going to pick up that crankbait and cover this and bounce it around those logs. And I'll do that about 3 logs and bam, here comes a bass. And then I keep doing it, and then you've been blessed to see the videos. Sometimes it's the same thing. Sometimes I've spent most of the morning at Cumberland and ain't had 2 bites. And I said, you know what, I'm just not going to fight it today. I'm going to pick up my spinning rod and throw that little tight line. I'll throw a little Ned rig, which a lot similar to that right there, and wham, there comes the fish. So in order to be successful on a consistent basis, you have to learn to be versatile. You have to learn to adapt to the conditions. Like I said, a lot of people ask me questions, and that's probably the biggest advice that I could give you, is that you need to be versatile. There is times to be hard-headed. You know, it's something too that you need to think about. There are days that it's time to be hard-headed. Okay, there are days to where if I've thrown 4 different baits the first 2 hours and I haven't had a bite, and I pick up this crankbait and I make about 5 casts and I've caught 2 fish, I need to be hard-headed and keep fishing that crankbait. What we tend to do is, oh, I found them with the crankbait, now I want to pick up my spinnerbait. There's a reason why they're hitting that crankbait. Keep on throwing it. Try to figure out what it is they're doing. Throw it and just enjoy the day. You know, but there's a reason why they're wanting this versus this. Same thing. You know, if you get to a spot and you already know the bite's going to be tough, if I show up at a lake at 6 o'clock in the morning and the sun's starting to come up, I may throw that spinnerbait early in the morning and wake it right underneath. I may throw this one right here with that big thumping blade. I may drag it around. I may hold my rod tip up, work it as a topwater coming through, just barely buzzing underneath the water. You know, and as that sun comes up, then I may switch and go a little bit deeper to the crankbait. And then it goes even deeper to 12, 1 o'clock. I got a pretty good idea those fish are suspended. Then I may turn around and use this little bait right here. So I did that progressively. But here's the part to be stubborn just a little bit. If I start my day at 12 o'clock, it's not going to do me very good to start off my 12 o'clock day with this right around the shore in that clear water. Why? Because the odds of the fish being up there aren't very good. I could maybe start out with this, but if there's no wind, I'm probably not going to pick this up. Then what am I going to do if I showed up at 12 o'clock? I'm probably going to fish this right off the bat. So really, well, why would you do that? Because experience and time on the water has showed me, unless the wind picks up, and if the wind picks up, then I may try one of these too. You know, then I may do that. But if there's no wind, then I'm probably going to go straight to this, straight to a Ned rig, straight to a drop shot. I may pick up my jig. We really haven't talked a whole lot about a jig, but a jig applies the same as these. You know, if I've gone around the bank and I've pitched a jig for 2 hours and I haven't had a bite, a lot of them's like, well, you just hang in there. You're just trying to get 5 bites. Anymore, guys, I'm not trying to get just 5 bites. I'm just out there to enjoy the day. So if I can catch 25 on this little thing, then that's just what I'm gonna throw, is 25 on that little thing. Now, if I throw that jig for an hour in the morning and I set the hook and I get a 2 or 3 pounder on it, then yeah, I may fish it for another hour. But if I go another hour and don't get a bite, then guess what? I'm going to be switching to something else. Now, here's something else you got to be careful with. You can go through every lure in the tackle box, and eventually you've switched so much that that's all you've done all day is switch baits. So that's not the key either. That's something we got to understand. That goes back to our baits and our lures and our presentations. If they aren't reacting to a moving bait, a horizontal moving bait, a lot of times what I do is I eliminate horizontal moving baits. This is a horizontal moving bait. This is a horizontal moving bait. This is a horizontal moving bait. All these, in my opinion, if I threw this, or that, and then get a bite, I'm eliminating horizontal baits. Early in the morning, I may throw just something moving on top. Popper, walking bait. A lot of you I know like buzz baits. I may throw this, but it's because I'm taking that single blade and I'm spinning it and keeping it bubbling on top of the water. I may do this part, but I'm eliminating the middle because I don't feel like they're there. Same thing with on the bottom. I like throwing a jig, but there's no point in throwing a 1/2 ounce jig and dragging it on the bottom, or a 3/4 jig and dragging it on the bottom, if you know that fish are up in 5, 6 foot of water. So that's one of the first things that I like learning to do. I like trying to figure out what depth they're in, what season are we in. All those factors have to come into play, and honestly, experience is what does that. A lot of us, what we tend to do is, well, the crankbait's not working, I'm going to throw this other crankbait. I'm going to throw this other crankbait, and I'm going to throw this other crankbait, and we're like, man, I don't understand why I'm not getting a bite. You're fishing the same water column. You need to change water columns. Go to something on the very bottom, maybe. Go to something on the very top. You'd be amazed. Sometimes they won't chase this, but you bring a top water across early in the morning, 12 o'clock in the afternoon. I've done it at all times of the day. They'll come up and they'll nail that top water. What does that mean? That means that they're looking for top baits. They're looking for feeding up. They're not looking straight across, which is what this would be. They're looking up. So they're feeding on bait fish up there, okay? This, if we're fishing it the way a lot of us fish it, we're banging around the bottom of the rocks. They don't want that presentation. These are the things, these are the keys that separate tool from my favorite bait. There is no such thing as one bait in bass fishing that is just the best at everything. You can argue that a swim bait, swim jig, spinner may be the most versatile of all the baits there is, because A jig, depending on your trailer that you put on it, you can swim it through the water, you can hop it along the bottom, or you can reel it really fast and use it on top. You can argue with that with a spinnerbait, because technically a spinnerbait is just a jig and now it has a spinner attached to it. So you can let it flutter down, you could use it on the bottom, you can wake it on top, you can do different things. That's why for years they used to say the spinnerbait was the most versatile. But the problem is, there's times where they will short strike a spinnerbait and they'll engulf a crankbait. There's times that they won't touch either one of these. And this right here is the only way you can get a bite from them, whether it be Ned rig or this. And whenever the Ned rig was introduced, it showed people a lot of things. A lot of fish were caught after that Ned rig was introduced to people that they never dreamed people could catch fish. A lot of fishing conditions. Same thing with this little tight line. It showed a lot of people, and now everybody uses it on that little depth finder they got up front. And it's even more popular now because a lot of people like to use it with that forward sonar. I don't. I just fish it just like any other bait. I cover plenty of water with it, just like I'd be fishing a little crankbait. I fish that little tight line just going down the bank. And that's how I catch the majority of the fish that I catch, especially in the middle of winter. And this summer, I plan on spending some time trying it because I believe that any bait that you can catch fish on a consistent basis in the middle of winter, there's a good chance you can catch fish on that bait in the middle of summer, because those are the two extreme conditions. There is a time in the summer to where it's real hard to get a bite because that water temperature is the way that it is, and that water does clear up a lot during the middle of summer in a lot of lakes. So to me, this little bait becomes deadly anytime you have suspended fish in really clear water. This little bait right here becomes very effective when you're drawing a reaction strike. That means the fish really isn't there to eat. He's just reacting to something that happened. And then spinnerbait bait, the bite can be that way too at times, don't get me wrong. But anyway, I just figured this would help everybody just a little bit, especially a brand new, somebody who fishes a lot. They're probably thinking, well, I've already heard all that stuff. But to somebody who is new and thinks, what's the best bait for me to have? Well, to be honest with you, you need a little bit of several different baits. Originally, that's how all of us get caught having the tackle we do, because nothing's working. We go buy something, we try it, it works, we use it a time or two, now it doesn't work, and then somebody else says, hey, I've been catching them on this. We buy it, we try it, we catch a few, and now we've got tackle box after tackle box after tackle box. And then when we go out, we're like, oh my goodness, what do I throw? Well, I started narrowing mine down a little bit, but I also started to piece together and realize that there are times to where it does make a difference, whether it's flat-sided crankbait or round crankbait, to where it's an obvious difference which one they'll bite. I mean, you could throw this all day long and catch 2 fish. You go right behind that person, throw this one, and catch 15. There are days that happens. But on a normal day-to-day basis, just from my personal experience, I try to figure out what level of the water column they're in. Either hitting top, especially in the summertime, hitting on the top, hitting in the middle, or are they on the bottom? And if they're on the bottom, then I usually try first some type of jig presentation, because it's easier to keep that on the bottom. If a jig isn't working, then I'll usually try a drop shot. Drop shot, you can drag along the bottom. You can pick just about any finicky type of bite up with a drop shot. If they're in the middle of the column, depending on the water clarity, depending on what lake I'm fishing, could be a crankbait, could be a spinnerbait. If it's on top, then I'm probably going to use some type of walking bait or a popper. I've used buzz bait some, but I'm not as confident with a buzz bait as I am a walking bait. I have caught a lot of fish. Actually, my biggest bass last year, which is very easily a 6+. I didn't have a scale with me, but it's very easily over 6 pound largemouth just at a regular common lake here close to where I live. I've caught my biggest smallmouth, which was over 21 inches. on that same walking bait. So to me, a walking bait just draws out, and I couldn't tell you how many, honestly, fish over 4 pounds, bass over 4 pounds that I've caught on that walking bait. So that's why it tends to be. And a popper the same. I've caught plenty of fish with a popper. That could be a whole different video just talking about poppers versus walking baits, but that's the concept. You know, to me, I'm looking for baits that, yes, I can cover water with, but I'm also looking for baits that I can be effective with. So that's the 3 depth ranges that I usually try to go with. And guess what? Most of the baits work. Most of the baits will catch fish, but your job as a fisherman is to find out, okay, which one works in the situation that I'm in. Trial and error has a lot to do with that. Sometimes you do stuff that just blows your mind. You're like, well, I would have never believed that would work, but it does. So you hear a lot of people talk about it. Pay attention to the fish. If you really want to learn to bass fishing, then you need to learn several different techniques. Because if you want to be consistent throughout the whole year, you're not going to be able to do it doing just one bait. That's what I'm hoping that this video, those pictures will show you, is that yes, if you keep going to the same pond over and over, I believe even a lot of times those fish get conditioned to that same bait. You're going to have to find other ways to catch them. At different seasons, they're at different depth ranges, they're after different things. You need to figure that stuff out. There are times of the year that I can tell you right now, like at Lake Cumberland, that smallmouth, you catch a smallmouth and it has the strongest crawdad smell you've ever smelled in your life. Guess what they're feeding on? Good chance they're feeding on crawdads. You can go at a different season and you won't smell a crawdad on them, and you're like, well, I don't understand. Is it a smallmouth? Yes, it is, but they're feeding on shads and they no longer have that crawdad smell to them. It's very interesting how that works. That's up to you to figure out which season's which, but just a little insight there. Anyway, I hope this blesses somebody. I hope this helps you. I've got my boat here that's going to get worked on just for a little bit. Like I said, this is my downtime of the year. I hope to go out here in a couple more days. I've got some days planned to go fishing for a little bit, so I hope to get back on the water. But until I do, God bless you all. Thank you for watching the videos. Thank you for sharing the videos. You're all a huge blessing to me. Hope this helps you. I hope it helps you catch more fish. Be careful during the summer. The summer can be, you can be out there and seem like you're having a lot of fun, but make sure you always take water with you. Make sure you always obey all the rules that are out there, because it's a time on the water that there's more people. So it tends to be a little more dangerous. You got to watch out for them just as much as you do everything else. But anyway, God bless you. Don't forget, Jesus loves you. Y'all have a wonderful day.